Hey guys, have you ever found yourself reacting in ways that don't quite make sense? Maybe you experience very strong emotions or impulses that feel like they come from somewhere deeper and not from yourself. Today I want to talk with you about something that's called transgenerational trauma, and this might explain why we have emotion and why we feel certain things that actually don't make sense for our personal experience that we had in our life. So let's start with a little definition. Transgenerational trauma is when the effects of a very traumatic event, like a war, are passed down from one generation to the next. This means that even if you haven't personally experienced a trauma, we might still carry on some of the effects emotionally or psychologically or even physically from our ancestors. So imagine your ancestors went through something incredibly difficult that we cannot imagine even now, although we have also ongoing wars today. And imagine your ancestors went through surviving a war or losing loved ones or living with extreme food scarcity. These experiences were deeply stressful and even life-threatening. The impact of these events doesn't just end with them. These experiences are passed down the line and continue to affect their children, their grandchildren, or even further down the line. Let's talk about what I experienced. Of course, I don't know if it's transgenerational trauma. It's not easy to really prove that this is because of that, but if you cannot find a real reason in your everyday life, it can be a cause. So, for example, sometimes when I'm invited to a big dinner, I eat a lot of food. Like, there's a lot of food on the tables, and I sometimes or very often have the problem to stop when I'm full, like to stop eating when I'm full. And I know already that I'm full because like it's not a good feeling to stuff more into your body when you know that you're not hungry anymore, but still I continue. And afterwards I usually feel uncomfortable and regretful that I did it. So it's a strange feeling, almost like I don't know where it's coming from and I don't have the control over it. And one possible reason for this could be that my grandparents lived through a war where food was extremely scarce. They had to endure hunger for long periods of time, and many people around them even died because they didn't have enough food because of starvation. So it's possible that this experience, this survival instinct, was somehow passed down, influencing the way I respond to food, even now, generations later. And you can go even more back in history, into the evolution, and also there, when food was scarce, we as humans trying to survive, we were especially happy when we found some good food resources or very nutritious food that has a lot of fat and has a lot of sugar, because this is what kept us alive and could help us to endure next following periods of starvation. But today in our everyday life it's become a real burden to us because we have food everywhere, and our instinct is still the same, that what's the most tasty for us is things that contain a lot of fat and sugar, because back then in evolution these foods kept you alive and made sure that you stayed alive. This could be a very general transgenerational trauma. This was my little story, but let's look additionally at some research about transgenerational trauma. Studies on Holocaust survivors, for example, show that their children and grandchildren often carry heightened levels of anxiety and stress. And it's not just an emotional response, it seems to be biological. This phenomenon has also been studied in other groups, like communities affected by slavery, displacement, or natural disasters. So this is where the field of epigenetics comes in and becomes very interesting. Epigenetics is the study of how our genes can be influenced by our environment and experiences. Because you might think, okay, genes and our DNA, it's something not so flexible and it cannot change so fast. It needs thousands of years of evolution. And generally that's true. But in epigenetics, the DNA stays the same, but there are certain markers that can activate or deactivate genes. So the DNA is still the same, but the activation of the genes is changing. Epigenetics help to explain how trauma might actually be stored and passed down biologically. Trauma affects our stress response systems, especially hormones like cortisol that are released in very difficult stress situations. And when someone experiences extreme stress, like in a war, their body and brain adapt to survive. These adaptations can be written into our genes, affecting how stress and survival responses work. And then these markers on our genes that activate certain genes, for example, they activate certain genes that produce more of the stress hormones. These adaptations can be passed down and affect future generations. Yeah, I just wanted to talk with you about it and give you some insights into this field that is often neglected, I feel, and yeah, not so popular. Of course, because of the difficulty to measure it. Psychology always wants to measure things very precisely, and of course, transgenerational trauma, it cannot be measured easily, especially maybe if your ancestors don't live anymore and you need to analyze the genes. So there are some challenges of how to measure it, but for my understanding, it definitely seems very plausible. Thank you for watching and staying with me, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.